Buckle up, because today we are diving deep into one of the most captivating stories in recent history.
Oh yeah, this one is wild.
Elizabeth Holmes, Theranos, and how a company promising to revolutionize healthcare with just a drop of blood
Just a tiny drop.
ended up becoming, well, a cautionary tale.
A cautionary tale of ambition and deception.
It's crazy how the allure of a simple finger prick blood test,
Yeah.
I mean,
But wait.
it just captured the imagination of everyone.
Investors, the public, everybody.
Theranos was valued at billions, with Elizabeth Holmes being hailed as like the next Steve Jobs.
Oh yeah.
Magazine covers youngest self-made female billionaire.
But then the dream turned into a nightmare.
Total nightmare, accusations of fake demonstrations, inaccurate results.
A culture of secrecy.
Oh my gosh, yeah, like a spy thriller.
So that's what we're going to dive into today.
We are, and we've got some great sources for you guys.
Excerpts from a couple of YouTube videos. We've got CEO to Convict, Elizabeth Holmes Girl Bossed Too Close to the Sun,
Love that title.
and The Crimes of Elizabeth Holmes.
Plus some fascinating insights from various articles.
Yeah.
Because we're going to unpack how this seemingly impossible dream turned into this massive fraud and explore the impact that it had on the healthcare industry.
For sure.
And the perception of female entrepreneurs.
It's not just about a failed company.
Right.
It's a story that raises questions about ambition,
Ethics.
ethics, the fine line between innovation and deception.
Okay, let's start with Elizabeth Holmes herself.
Okay.
She dropped out of Stanford at 19 to start Theranos,
90.
driven by this ambition to not just disrupt healthcare, but also, it seems, to restore her family's legacy.
Interesting.
I mean, her ancestors were surgeons, entrepreneurs, even connected to Napoleon's generals.
Wow.
It's like greatness was part of her DNA.
And she very deliberately cultivated that image.
Yeah.
The Steve Jobs comparisons weren't accidental.
The black turtlenecks.
The black turtleneck's obsession with secrecy, that whole aura of mystique. It's as if she understood that in Silicon Valley, image can be as powerful as a working product, at least initially.
Yeah, and it worked. I mean, she attracted some big names to her board.
Big names.
Kissinger, Mattis, Schultz.
Wow.
People not easily fooled. So how did she convince them that Theranos was the real deal?
Well, Theranos tapped into a very real fear.
Which is,
Needles.
yeah, nobody likes needles.
Nobody likes needles, and they promised a solution that seemed almost magical, accurate blood tests from just a drop of blood.
That's amazing.
Imagine a world where getting your blood tested was as easy as checking your blood sugar.
That would be incredible.
No needles, no waiting for results. That's the dream Theranos sold.
It sounds so simple, so revolutionary.
Right.
No wonder investors were lining up to throw money at her.
Exactly. But medical experts,
Oh,
they were skeptical from the start.
why?
Because extracting enough reliable data from such a small sample, it goes against some pretty basic principles of lab testing.
Okay.
There are reasons why traditional blood draws require a certain volume of blood.
So even early on, there were red flags.
Yes.
But those were ignored.
They were ignored because the narrative was just too compelling.
It was like people wanted to believe in this miracle.
They wanted to believe, and Elizabeth was a master storyteller.
Okay.
She could articulate this vision of the future of accessible and affordable healthcare for everyone.
Right.
It was captivating, especially for investors looking for the next big thing in healthcare.
It wasn't just the promise of the technology, though. There's this whole other layer to Elizabeth, her persona.
Right.
Some people even believe she deepened her voice to sound more authoritative in the male-dominated world of tech.
Interesting.
It's almost like she was playing a character.
It speaks to her calculated approach.
Yeah.
She understood the power of perception, especially for a young woman in a field dominated by older men. Every detail,
Wow.
from her voice to her clothing, seemed designed to project an image of brilliance and authority.
Okay, so we have this captivating founder, a seemingly revolutionary technology, and investors eager to get on board. But there's also Sunny Balwani, who enters the picture as COO, despite having no experience in healthcare.
And his role in this story is crucial.
Yeah.
Former employees describe him as controlling and demanding,
Really?
creating a culture of fear and paranoia within Theranos.
So you have Elizabeth driven to succeed at all costs.
Yes.
Sunny reportedly controlling and demanding.
Uh-huh.
And this impossible dream they're both clinging to.
Right.
This is where the cracks in the facade start to, I don't know,
Yeah.
turn into gaping chasms, for example. One employee told a story about how Sunny berated a lab worker for simply asking a question about the technology.
Oh, wow.
It was clear that questioning anything was not tolerated.
Not at all.
So you've got this pressure cooker environment A technology that's not working as promised, and a leadership team that's becoming increasingly desperate. It feels like the stage is set for a dramatic downfall.
And that's exactly what happens. The cracks in Theranos' carefully constructed facade, they couldn't stay hidden forever. It started with whispers, then murmurs, and finally, a roar of accusations that brought the whole house of cards tumbling down.
The beginning of the end really starts with Tyler Schultz.
Right, Tyler.
Remember, he's the grandson of George Schultz, a board member and former Secretary of State.
Oh, wow. Talk about family drama.
Right.
Yeah.
So Tyler noticed inconsistencies in the lab and bravely started raising concerns, but instead of being addressed, he was met with resistance and intimidation.
Wow.
Imagine being a young scientist, seeing these potential problems, and then being silenced by a company claiming to be revolutionary.
It must have been incredibly frustrating, especially with his grandfather being so involved in the company.
Absolutely, and Tyler's experience was not unique. Many employees who dared to question the technology or raise concerns were quickly shut down or even forced out of the company.
It's almost as if Theranos was more concerned with protecting its image than actually addressing the issues at hand.
So what finally broke the story wide open?
Enter John Carreyrou, an investigative journalist at the Wall Street Journal.
Okay.
Tyler, along with other whistleblowers, contacted Carreyrou and shared their concerns, and this is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Carreyrou's reporting was meticulous. He interviewed former employees, obtained confidential documents, and pieced together this damning picture of Theranos' fraudulent practices.
And Elizabeth Holmes was not happy about it.
Not at all.
She unleashed her legal team, led by David Boies, the guy who represented Al Gore in the 2000 election recount, to try to shut down the investigation.
It speaks to the power and influence that Holmes had amassed. She was used to getting her way and silencing critics, but Carreyrou and the Wall Street Journal, they were not intimidated.
In October 2015, the Wall Street Journal published Carreyrou's bombshell expose, revealing that the Edison device, Theranos' supposed miracle machine, was not producing accurate results.
And remember, this wasn't just about faulty gadgets.
Right.
These were blood tests that could have serious implications for people's health, their diagnoses, their lives. Right.
The article detailed how Theranos was secretly using traditional blood testing machines from other companies to run most of their tests.
Oh, wow.
It was a massive deception.
So the very technology they claimed to be disrupting, they were secretly relying on behind the scenes. It's like opening a gourmet burger joint and then serving McDonald's in the back.
Exactly. And the fallout from the Wall Street Journal article was swift and severe. Walgreens, which had partnered with Theranos to offer in-store blood testing, ended its partnership. Federal regulators launched investigations, and lawsuits began piling up.
There was one particularly heartbreaking case that involved a woman in Arizona who received a faulty Theranos test result indicating she was miscarrying.
Imagine the emotional distress and trauma that this woman experienced based on a test that was never reliable in the first place. It brought to light the real human cost of Theranos' deception. This wasn't just about financial fraud anymore. It was about patients' lives being put at risk. And as the evidence mounted, Elizabeth Holmes continued to deny any wrongdoing. She went on CNBC and tried to discredit the Wall Street Journal, but the damage was done.
The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, they found critical violations at Theranos' lab, even stating that the conditions posed immediate jeopardy to patient safety.
Wow.
That's a serious accusation for any medical facility.
It was a complete unraveling. Theranos was forced to void 2 years' worth of blood tests, potentially affecting tens of thousands of patients. The company, once valued at $9 billion, was essentially worth.
And in a final blow, Elizabeth Holmes was banned from operating a lab for 2 years.
Wow.
It was the end of an era, the implosion of a company built on a foundation of lies, but the story and the consequences were far from over.
Because Elizabeth Holmes and Sunny Balwani were still facing criminal charges.
And that's where the legal drama really begins. The trial was a media sensation, with all the elements of a true crime thriller, intrigue, betrayal, and high-stakes legal maneuvering. It captivated the nation, raising questions about ambition, ethics, and the culture of Silicon Valley.
It was like watching a Hollywood movie unfold in real time. You had Elizabeth Holmes, once the darling of Silicon Valley, now facing the possibility of years in prison.
Yeah, the prosecution meticulously laid out their case, arguing that Holmes had knowingly misled investors and patients,
Right.
choosing fraud over business failure, as they put it.
And Elizabeth took the stand in her own defense.
She did.
She testified for 7 days.
7 days.
Trying to portray herself as a well-intentioned entrepreneur who made mistakes, but never intended to deceive anyone.
It's a classic defense.
Right, and she blamed her staff,
She did.
claiming they were the ones responsible for the lab's problems.
Oh, wow.
She even accused Sunny Balwani of emotional and psychological abuse.
Really?
alleging that he had manipulated her into making bad decisions.
It was a high-stakes gamble, a desperate attempt to shift the blame and sway the jury. But in the end, it wasn't enough.
In January 2022, the jury found Elizabeth Holmes guilty on 4 counts of fraud and conspiracy,
Wow.
each carrying a maximum sentence of 20 years in prison.
It was a stunning fall from grace.
And a few months later, she was sentenced to 11 years and 3 months in federal prison from world's youngest self-made female billionaire to convicted felon.
Wow. That's
wild.
Yeah, it's a stark reminder that no matter how brilliant or charismatic you are, the law eventually catches up with you.
And Sunny Balwani didn't escape justice either. He was tried separately and found guilty on all 12 counts of fraud and conspiracy, receiving a sentence of almost 13 years.
So both Elizabeth and Sunny are now behind bars, but the Theranos saga continues to raise questions about the culture of Silicon Valley and the role of ambition in the pursuit of innovation.
Theranos became this cautionary tale about the dangers of fake it till you make it.
Right.
This idea that you can hype up a product or technology even if it doesn't quite work yet and somehow will it into existence.
But in the case of Theranos, that mentality had devastating consequences. People's lives were put at risk because of a technology that was never fully realized.
It also raises important questions about due diligence. Investors poured hundreds of millions of dollars into Theranos without fully understanding the technology or verifying the company's claims.
It highlights the need for critical thinking and skepticism, especially in a world where hype and promises often overshadow reality.
And there's another layer to this story that's hard to ignore: the fact that Elizabeth Holmes is a woman.
Her gender undoubtedly played a role in both her rise and her fall. She was initially celebrated as this girl boss disruptor, a rare example of a woman achieving success in the male-dominated tech industry. But when the fraud was exposed, she became a symbol of female ambition gone wrong.
It's almost like she was held to a different standard, both praised and criticized more intensely because of her gender.
Exactly, and that raises concerns about double standards and the challenges faced by women in leadership roles. Did Elizabeth's gender make her more susceptible to scrutiny and criticism when things went wrong?
It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
Yeah.
And even after her conviction, Elizabeth Holmes continued to make headlines. She got married, had 2 children, and even named her daughter Invicta, which means unconquered in Latin.
Oh, wow.
Some saw it as a sign of defiance, a refusal to accept responsibility for her actions.
It certainly adds another layer of intrigue to this already fascinating story. What was going through her mind? Was it a deliberate attempt to control the narrative, or simply a reflection of her unwavering belief in her own innocence? It's hard to say.
And then there's the whole homie phenomenon, people who idolized Elizabeth Holmes even after her conviction.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about that.
They wear black turtlenecks, create TikToks about her, and some even showed up at her trial in a show of support.
It's a bizarre and some unsettling aspect of this story. It speaks to the power of personality and the allure of a good story, even when that story is ultimately one of deception and betrayal.
So what's the takeaway from all of this? What can we learn from the Theranos saga?
I think the most important lesson is the importance of critical thinking and skepticism. Don't be swayed by hype charisma or a good story. Look at the facts, ask tough questions, and don't be afraid to challenge authority, even when it's coming from someone as seemingly brilliant and successful as Elizabeth Holmes.
And remember that innovation should never come at the cost of ethics and human well-being. The pursuit of progress should never justify cutting corners or putting people at risk.
Absolutely.
The Theranos story is a complex one, full of twists and turns.
It is.
But ultimately, it's a reminder that the truth always comes out and the consequences of deception can be devastating.
They can be.